I'm Jason UFC, and today we have a story about Chael Sonnen pleads with the UFC to cancel the Robert Whittaker versus Dricus du Plessis fight, saying, "What are we even doing out here?" Chael Sonnen badly wants the UFC to cancel Robert Whittaker versus Dricus du Plessis match. Still Knox is fresh off of his clash with Drake. Let's not call him Still Knox. No one knows him as that. Dricus du Plessis or DDP. Let's call him a DDP, right? That's a cool name. DDP is coming off of a win versus Derek Brunson in March at UFC 285. I think it was a second round finish. In that outing, yeah, it was a second round. In that outing, Dricus du Plessis scored a second round stoppage win over the longtime middleweight contender. That victory moved Dricus du Plessis, the South African, winning streak to 7 in a row, having previously defeated such names such as Darren Till in that stretch. Following the victory, Dricus du Plessis began calling for a title shot. For his part, middleweight champion Israel Adesanya later showed interest in that fight as well. In fact, the last stylebender and Dricus du Plessis are currently engaged in a heated war of words, with the champion stated that was definitely his next fight. With that in mind, Chael Sonnen wants to know why Dricus du Plessis is fighting Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker has been out of action since a decision win over Marvin Vettori last year, but was booked to face the South. Why do you keep calling him South African? Was booked to face Dricus du Plessis, DDP, earlier this month. The two middleweights will collide at UFC 290 in July, International Fight Week. However, if it was left up to the bad guy, Chael Sonnen, this fight wouldn't be happening at all. Chael Sonnen questioned wide about what's happening, considering Adesanya and Dricus du Plessis' ongoing rivalry. Dricus du Plessis versus Robert Whittaker, guys. Is it too late to scratch it? Right, Chael Sonnen stated on his very, very hype YouTube channel. Go and subscribe to his YouTube channel. Is it too late? Why are we doing this fight? Israel Adesanya hasn't missed a day since the Dragon of the Caucasus. Dricus du Plessis is meeting him right back. Dricus du Plessis is being a good partner. He just doesn't have the reach. You got to search a little bit, but it's there. He continued. Israel Adesanya yesterday said, "That's going to be my next fight. I'm not going to fight anybody else. That is the fight I want." Now he can get it. He knows he can't get. Hold on. Okay. Now he knows. Now he can't get it. He knows he can't get it. At least he can't get it. What? Dricus du Plessis is busy with Whittaker. I believe him when Izzy says he's not fighting anyone else. I believe him for a very good reason. So now we have an opportunity to just pull the fight. What are we even doing out here? Now this is a tough. Has the UFC ever canceled any fights like this and remade? I'm pretty sure they have. I can't come up with any off the top of my head. I'm an MMA casual, so I can't remember everything like the hardcores can. But I can't remember the UFC canceling one fight and just booking another one. I would say the latest or one type of fight that happened kind of like this and is similar, not similar, but as far as canceling and rebooking, what happened with Chimaev and Nate Diaz last year, right? Chimaev came in, he weighed over the welterweight weight limit. So Chimaev ended up fighting Kevin Holland in a catchweight fight. Nick Diaz ended up fighting Tony Ferguson in a different fight. So I can remember that happening, but I don't remember the UFC just like flat out making a match and saying, you know what, we were wrong. This match doesn't make sense. We're going to book two different opponents for these two fighters. I can't remember a specific instance of that happening. Now, as far as what are we doing out here? Why is Robert Whittaker fighting Dricus du Plessis? That's a good question. I don't know, right? I personally was not too impressed with Dricus du Plessis' win over Derek Brunson, I thought Derek Brunson clearly won the first round. I felt like Dricus du Plessis was breathed in pretty hard, heavy in the second round. He did ended up finishing Derek Brunson in the second round, but Derek Brunson just always lose those fights. But I wasn't too impressed with Dricus du Plessis' victory there. But I mean, what's kind of left? Like my opinion of the UFC middleweight division, it's empty. It's a very very to say the least, it's a very empty division at this point. Israel Adesanya has won two victories over I think almost everybody in the top five. He has a few victories over a few opponents in the top 10. You have Alex Pereira, who's moving to the light heavyweight division. Calvin Gastelum is currently ranked in the middleweight division. I believe he's moving down to the welterweight division. Chris Curtis, who is like on a 7-fight losing streak, he's in the top of the middleweight division. He's ranked like number 15. So that's 3 fighters in the top 15 who are not even in the division anymore. So, I mean, it's just a very empty division. Robert Whittaker has already lost twice to Israel Adesanya. I don't think anyone would have been upset if the UFC said, you know what, let's just make Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya next. I don't see why they didn't make this, but we haven't really been getting too many answers from the UFC recently as far as what's happening with championship matches. Kobe Covington fighting Leon Edwards. Kobe Covington being the number one contender. We haven't really got an answer as to why Kobe Covington is the number one contender. In the heavyweight division, Stipe Miocic is the number one contender. Stipe Miocic lost his last fight versus Francis Ngannou 2 years ago. He got brutally knocked out in the second round, has not fought since then, and is coming back to a title fight. And somehow he's the number one contender in the heavyweight division. I don't know why. I can't answer why Dricus du Plessis is fighting Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker is the number one contender in the middleweight division. I think what the UFC was kind of banking on was Alex Pereira was going to defeat Israel Adesanya again, and then you would have a fight like Robert Whittaker versus Pereira and Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. I think that's what they were probably looking at, something like that happening. But, I mean, with all the beef that Dricus du Plessis has with Israel Adesanya, the UFC should have. They should have made the fight. I know it leaves Robert Whittaker kind of out in the cold, but I mean, I think Robert Whittaker versus like a Brendan Allen, that would have been a good fight. Robert Whittaker versus a Sean Strickland, right? Why not make that fight? Robert Whittaker already has a victory over Jared Cannonier, over Marvin Vettori, but Robert Whittaker has not faced Paulo Costa. We don't know what's happening in Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa is talking about welterweights. Paulo Costa is talking about light heavyweights. I don't know what's happening with Paulo Costa, but there's a few names for Robert Whittaker to fight. Even though I'm an MMA casual, the UFC could have easily made Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa. UFC could have made, Robert Whittaker versus Chimaev. I know some people hate that idea. UFC should have made Robert Whittaker versus Sean Strickland, right? Sean Strickland is fighting some unranked middleweight for some unknown reason who's like 1-0 in the UFC. I don't even know the guy's name, but the UFC could have made Sean Strickland versus Robert Whittaker. That would have been interesting. Or Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa. I have 3 names, or even 4 names. Even Brendan Allen. There's 4 names that I can name. Just off the top of my head, and I'm an MMA casual, that would have made sense for Robert Whittaker's next fight compared to, I think most people look at this fight and say, chances are Robert Whittaker is going to beat Dricus du Plessis, and now it sets up Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya for a third time, where, with all the heat and all the back and forths between Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya, it's just like people want to see that fight. Now, maybe with the UFC, is looking into the future and they're really trying to build up the hype around Dricus du Plessis, and, a victory over Robert Whittaker for Dricus du Plessis puts the stamp on him being the number one contender. No one could say any, even though I don't think anyone would complain. Like I said, Stipe Miocic is the number one contender. Kobe Covington is the number one contender. People are complaining about that, but I don't think anyone would have had too many complaints with Dricus du Plessis being the number one contender, fighting Israel Adesanya. But like I said, maybe the UFC wants to see Dricus du Plessis. I mean, obviously, maybe they just weren't impressed with his performances, right? Because they could have made the fight, and for some reason, they're giving him someone like Robert Whittaker, former undisputed middleweight champion, a extremely difficult fight for Dricus du Plessis. It will be a 3-round fight. It's not going to be the main event. It's not going to be a 5-round fight. I don't understand why this is a 3-round fight. It's so many questions. But like I said, the UFC middleweight division, I got to be honest, at this point, it kind of gives me a headache. And it's too empty. My favorite UFC division, even though I am a proud MMA casual, not that I'm proud that, okay, I am proud to be a casual. It's just, I've loved MMA for like many years, since UFC Best of Volume 1. But I can't follow everything. I can't remember Tony Ferguson's last 4 fights. I don't remember everything about it. I'm a casual as far as I try to watch as many events as possible, but I can't remember everything, right? I can't remember everything in the UFC. But my favorite division in the UFC at the moment is the UFC welterweight division. I feel like there's a lot of contenders and a lot of UFC welterweight fights booked in the next 2, 3, 4 months, where in the middleweight division, people can't really name any of the contenders. There's no smoke. Like I said, Israel Adesanya has 1-2 victories over most of the contenders in the top 5. So most people probably wanted to see new blood, someone like a Dricus du Plessis, someone like a Brendan Allen, maybe even someone like a Sean Strickland, right? Even if they made Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland. At some point, we don't want to see Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya 3. We don't want to see Marvin Vettori versus Israel Adesanya 3. We don't want to see Jared Cannonier versus Israel Adesanya 2. Right? Like it's too much going on. But let me know your opinion of this story. Do you agree with Chael Sonnen that the UFC should cancel the Robert Whittaker versus Dricus du Plessis match? And if you do, who do you think Robert Whittaker should fight, right? Like I said, I have Allen, I got Strickland, who else did I name? Anybody else? Chimaev and Costa. So those are 4 names I would give, Robert Whittaker instead of giving him Dricus du Plessis. So I have to say, I agree with Chael Sonnen. The fight to make right now, next, is Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. I'm Jason, UFC. Today we have a story about YouTube influencer, right? That's what he is at this point. Chael Sonnen pleads with the UFC to cancel the UFC middleweight fight between Robert Whittaker and Dricus du Plessis, asking, what are we even doing out here? Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the $1 donation button, and please tune in to the next video on this channel. Thanks a million for watching.